Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Well, it's a great pleasure and a privilege to have a chance to talk to Roy Wagner. Roy, when and where were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, October 2nd, 1938, the birthday of the Mahatma Gandhi, Wallace Stevens.
Can you speak very loudly?
The birthday of the Mahatma Gandhi,
Yeah.
Wallace Stevens, and Groucho Marx.
Which of them do you take after, I wonder?
I hope Wallace Stevens, although Gandhi has good possibilities.
Lovely. Some people like to go back to at least their grandparents, certainly their parents. Can you tell me something about your ancestry?
My ancestry was originated, we are told, in Hamelin, in Lower Saxony, responded to the call of Bela IV of Hungary to repopulate lands depleted by the Mongols. And so they were metal workers living in eastern Carpathians under Hungarian rule until my great-grandfather came to the United States. All of my ancestors, okay?
All your ancestors, right, on both sides?
Yes.
Yeah. And then at what stage did they leave?
The people from their community came to Cleveland, Ohio, where I was born.
At what time did they come?
My great-grandfather came over in 1890. This was a high point of immigration into the United States from Eastern Europe.
What was their occupation on the whole?
Their occupation was metalworking of one kind or another. It said that my great-grandfather had owned a water-powered iron forge.
And then what about your parents?
My father was the chief of police of Cleveland, Ohio, and a very tough guy. He's also an intellectual.
Was he?
Yeah, which is very unusual.
I mean, what sort of character, apart from being tough, was he?
His profile, he looked just like Dick Tracy, the American comic strip hero, and for most of his career, he was the chief of the detective bureau. So that's what an intellectual cop does.
Do you think having a father as an intellectual cop had any influence on your...
I'm sure it did. Actually, I don't think my father cared particularly much for anthropology. My mother liked it and encouraged me. She would buy me Kroger textbooks and stuff like that.
At what age?
Pardon?
At what age did she buy you
When
Kroger?
I was in my teens. She'd like to buy me poetry and things like that, I think. She had sort of different idea about things than my father. She liked anthropology very much. She didn't like it very much at all.
What did she have a job or?
No. She was, what we call a housewife, the kind of woman that existed in America at that time.
Still exists in small pockets around the world.
Occasionally.
But what was her personality apart from encouraging you?
She was very, very withdrawn and quiet. I often think of her as being like Kali.
A colleague?
Kali Ma, the Shakti goddess.
Oh yes.
You didn't want to cross her, but she was very withdrawn. Very interesting person, actually. She died young. She died at 52.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
One sister who is a very accomplished, she's not a professional Egyptologist. She writes novels about, say, the 17th dynasty of ancient Egypt. Very good novels. She's a much better writer than I am.
What name does she write under?
Nancy Elliott, that's her married name.
When did you and where did you first go to school?
Well, to college. I went to...
Well, no, not college, school.
Just...
primary school or whatever.
In Cleveland, Ohio, Benjamin Franklin Elementary School. And then I went to James Ford Rhodes High School in Cleveland. And then I went to Harvard.
Well, not too fast.
Okay.
I thought you were going to get me to speed you on, but in fact I'm going to slow you down.
Okay.
Because the early education is often quite interesting. Do you remember anything about your primary school?
Not much about my primary school, except for something that happened when I was 10 years old, and I still haven't figured it out. We had a garden in Benjamin Franklin's school, and we were taught to garden. One of the best things about my education, in fact, because when I became an adult, I lived in the country and did a great deal. I just had a big garden every year, and I was taught that. Basic Neolithic skill. One day in the spring, when I was waiting outside of the garden in a queue of students, we were told to be quiet, otherwise they would do something horrible. They intimidated us like that. This idea occurred to me, and I still, at the time I was totally mystified. I don't know where it came from. I still don't know where it came from. The idea was that of all the possible things, the many possible things that could happen at the next moment, only one of them would. And I don't know why the idea occurred to me in that way. I was not used to thinking things of that sort. It puzzled me for a long time. Later on I got to thinking that way a little bit, but I don't know where that came from. Otherwise, my record in elementary school and things like that was extremely mediocre. I didn't really do anything much until I got to high school. And that was very splendid, and I discovered sonnets. Sonnets.
Oh, sonnets.
I love to write
I'm very
sonnets.
deaf, I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Fine. I love to write sonnets, and so I started trying to write sonnets. They were, of course, horrible at that point. But and then I wanted to be a physicist. The thing I wanted to be most of all was a physicist, and I took these SAT tests that you take in the United States to qualify for college. And I'd always gotten terrible grades in math. And I took the verbal and the mathematics achievement tests, and I was done well in verbal tests and poorly in math ones. And something happened. I don't know what happened, and on a whim I had applied to Caltech, the California Institute of Technology, because they ran the Mount Palomar Observatory, and I thought that might be a nice place to be. I wanted to be an astronomer. And a faculty member from Caltech showed up one day at my high school, and he said he came to interview me. And I was dumbfounded. It turns out I did fairly well on the math test in spite of myself. So I had a long interview with this gentleman, and the whole time we talked about sonnets. I was just talking to him about sonnets, theory of the sonnet, and things like that. And he sort of said something. He said, you know, wasn't it astronomy you were interested in or something like that? And I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, that's all right. You see, I'm from the English department at Caltech. So I did not get into Caltech, but my greatest source of pride at that time was almost getting into Caltech. A very, very strange, skewed set of values. Later on in my life, I discovered that it was rather fun to write sonnets. I write lots of them now. I enjoy writing them. I like poetry a great deal.
And is poetry, reading poetry also important to you?
Yes, that's
so
right.
Which poets?
I was very keen on Dylan Thomas at first, and especially when I was in high school, and Rilke. I became like Yeats, became a total Rilke nut. I used to translate Rilke for Vic Turner, as a matter of fact, who really liked it. Vic Turner said that he liked Rilke so much he was going to give up on Yeats and all the Celtic poets. He said Rilke was just clearly superior. Rilke is really good. Chinese poets sometimes, haiku.
Mm.
I got to like some of the haiku writers and things like that. But
Now, all these, well, the haiku and so on are earlier, but the poets you mentioned are mainly 20th or 19th.
Shelley and Keats, especially Keats. I also like Goethe. I was told by the Harvard Astronomy Department to take German. And so I took actually quite a bit of German because I noticed it helped me to read Rilke. And I actually took a course, a wonderful course in Chaucer, in which the instructor, a very famous man named Bartlett Whitehaven, an expert on humor in Chaucer, he gave the course in a medieval fashion. He simply read the text. He read, say, the Canterbury Tales or the House of Fame or one of these Chaucer things. He would just read the textual material and comment. You know, like a professor at the University of Paris or something in the Middle Ages. The result was we could understand and speak Middle English, and that was cool. I thought that was like totally neat.
Lovely. Let's go back to the school. Were there any teachers at your high school, anyway, who particularly influenced you?
Yes, there was. We had Hiram T. Folkman, the incredible Shakespeare teacher. I mean, this guy.
How do you spell his name?
Folkman.
Yeah.
Folkman, and a math and science teacher named Oliver Hoffman. These two people were more or less guiding spirits to me. They were in some ways opposite people. They were amazing teachers. Folkman took elaborate pains. He would make you get up and interpret things in Shakespeare. He would make you explain what was being said. I think that this exercise in high school prepared me for, the art of explanation in anthropology. I mean, I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about explanation. I think explanation is much more important. Don Juan in Castaneda says that an explanation is always an apology. It's always a form of apology. Very well, I suppose it is. It's an apology for not knowing immediately what you're talking about, but you have to detour, right? Make some detours and explain. On the other hand, it's the best way of thinking about anthropology. I think that a lot of the things we would like to conquer with abstractions in anthropology are actually concrete. They're too concrete to actually stand the abstractions of theory, right? So we want a kind of concretivity, concrete experience, pragmatic, concrete experience with things. Okay, this is an object science. Okay, you remind me of it. So rather than and the explanations can be any kind of explanations as long as you communicate this, you see, to the audience. So I prefer to lecture extempore and just be guided by that kind of thing. Now that I think of it, and I've never thought of it this way before, I was prepared for this by my Shakespeare teacher, by Hiram Folkman. Very strange man.
What about the physics teacher? Maths?
Well, this was at the time the United States was going through a great deal of difficulty with Oppenheimer and the removal of his security clearance. In fact, I'll tell you a story. I was very much an Oppenheimer fan. And in fact, later on, got very interested in the case of Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was a verbal genius. He was a charismatic figure and very gifted in the use of words. I was told that he had in mind as an alternative career going into literature. It just, he happened to have matured at the time that quantum physics was big stuff in Germany. He went to Germany, went to Scotland, went to England, possibly even here, I think. and you know, did his graduate work in physics. It's not that original, but he was fantastically communicative. All right? So many years later, around 1990, I was sitting in my office in Virginia, and the phone rang, and someone was calling from Washington, D.C., and this man explained that he had taken up deep sea diving after retirement and was planning to do some diving in the islands north of New Guinea, and could I advise him on, you know, travel to New Guinea and things like this, which I did, and he thanked me, and he said, "Thank you. My name is Louis Strauss. I'm just another faceless Washingtonian."
Louis
Strauss.
Strauss.
This was the head of the Atomic Energy Committee that was responsible for removing Oppenheimer's security clearance. He was, I suppose, the ultimate enemy of my youth. And then much later, this guy calls me up and describes himself as another faceless Washingtonian. What this means, I found out, was that after Strauss, Louis Strauss had, by very devious means, in fact, using very nasty strategy, he hated Oppenheimer, managed to engineer this coup against Oppenheimer, which basically destroyed Oppenheimer's life.
Move your hands down a bit. Thanks.
Yes. After he had engineered this coup against Oppenheimer, he never held another government office. Oppenheimer had too many friends. Okay, he just did something too nasty. But this is a kind of a, you know, echo or something like that for me. I just thought it was unusual that should have happened.
So the only other thing to ask about school, well, a couple of things. One is, did you have any sort of, apart from sonnets, any external hobbies, music, games, sports?
Music, my roommate was an orchestral conductor and an extremely good one. All I had to do was hang around our suite. And music critics, instrumentalists, experts on particular composers would come by and just have long chats with my roommate and I. I learned more about classical.
This is at high school?
At Harvard. I'm talking about
yes, you see.
I just
We're
skipped ahead.
English school means before university.
Yes, and I think rightly so. And my son insists that that's where he got his main education too. We sent him to a very nice progressive school outside of Charlottesville called Tandem. And I quite agree with you, and I think it matters also for me, and I am pleased with your emphasis on that. I'm sorry.
So at high school,
yes.
Did you have any other particular interest, sport or music?
Not that I'm aware of. I think I was supposed to be discovering women, and I was slow at it. I think this got on the nerves.
Was it co-educational?
Yes, it was co-education. It was not a private school, as we say in the States. It was said to be the best public high school, in our sense, in the Cleveland area, and probably was. But Cleveland was a very working class. It was famous for its steel mills, right? So it's it was a peculiar environment. I loved it. It was a great time. It was a great time to be alive. You know, I really have really good memories.
This is must be the 50s, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Exactly the Fonz era, the era when rock and roll music, which I did not care for, you know, came into being and things like that. The height of the Cold War. The degree to which we Americans were being shut up, repressed, forced to mouth patriotic slogans was probably counterparted by the Soviet Union at that time. We always thought of ourselves as being free at that time, but we were not. We were under this heavy, doctrinaire constraint from the government. We were a free country.
This is the Macfarlane era, isn't it?
We were free people.
This is McCarthy era, isn't it?
Yes, and I did watch the McCarthy hearings on TV regularly.
At school, at high school?
After school.
Yeah.
I just come home and there would be McCarthy doing his outrageous stuff and his lawyers.
Did you feel it was outrageous at the time?
Yes.
Hmm.
I didn't like it, but I also felt that he was getting away with something. And I think that a lot of Americans responded to him this way. They thought, this guy is a real jackass, but look what he's getting away with. He's doing these power plays, and finally, everybody got sick of this, and the president, not one of my favorite people, Eisenhower, just came down on him, shut him up. I think Einstein responded when they were punishing Oppenheimer for very, very similar things. And this is the Red Scare and the McCarthy period. We didn't like it. I was not minded in that direction. I suppose I was a liberal or something.
Well, that leads on to sort of your politics either there or later on.
I'm an anarchist. I don't.
An anarchist.
I don't think the political fora that we have for opinion things like that are engage the major issues of our time. I'm not happy with them. I don't vote.
You haven't ever, or?
No, I voted for John F. Kennedy, and then he was shot, and after that I didn't want to vote.
Right, let's go on. I mean, you were very proud of being turned down or half accepted for Caltech, but going to Harvard seems even better. But
Yeah, well, not to me at the time. I went around in gloom. People congratulated me, but I went around in gloom.
Why was that?
Because I didn't get accepted into Caltech.
I see. But what about Harvard? How was that? What did you go to do?
I
at Harvard?
went there to be an astronomer, and that's why I took German. And through some stroke of luck, the astronomy department assigned a pioneer in astronomy, a women pioneer in astronomy, Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, to be my tutor. And so for a while, for about a year, I was working toward, being an astronomy major. And when she loved poetry and music, so that when I had a tutorial session with Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, we talked about Mozart, or we talked about poetry. That's what we talked about. There must be a lot of things like this in life. Much later in my life, when I got divorced, I engaged a famously vicious and beautiful divorce lawyer in the Charlottesville area. Okay, really famous for her vehemence and charm, and she was voted the best dressed woman in Charlottesville, and she drove this white Porsche. We never talked about law at all. Law had nothing to do. We would talk about cats and dogs. That's the only thing. She would hold up her lovebirds for me to kiss. There must be a whole lot of contextual things like this, like my talks with Cecilia Payne-Gaposchkin, where people simply talk about what they like to talk about, and it has nothing to do with why they're supposed to be there. I've noticed this quite a bit. There's like sonnets and physics or things like that.
Did you see any? Some people see some deep structural affinity between music and mathematics and things like this. Do you see?
I'm quite interested in those things. I do from time to time write things about this history of music. One of the biggest watershed events, I think, in Western music was the harmonization techniques of J.S. Bach, where he correlated the melodic or horizontal line with the harmonic or vertical line, and he was doing simultaneous stuff in both. That closes upon holography, which is a major interest of mine, holography and fractal mathematics, which we've seen in recent years. We've had a lot of successes with identifying what I call holographic worldviews in the IMI. My colleague Fred Damon does this sort of thing too with fractal mathematics. And I'm very excited about this, and I sometimes write things, or am writing things, connecting those kind of advances with the mathematical advances in music. I have a private theory. I sort of took up the cudgels for Johann Christian Bach a few years ago, the youngest son of Sebastian Bach, and apparently the favored son of Sebastian Bach, who was called the London Bach, and who was a court composer for Queen Charlotte. This was the George III era. And who was the most famous composer of his day, and we have lately learned the teacher of Mozart, who taught Mozart how to write music the Mozart way. What I think the secret of Christian Bach's music is syncopation. I think by the use of syncopation, he speeded up. He gave music the sense of increased speed or acceleration. Usually it's called the new music. It's the way that in London and in Mannheim, Germany, in about 1750, music suddenly changed and became the classical music of the Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, and subsequent era. I believe that the watershed event there was syncopation. You know, this is a theory. I don't know who would agree with me, but and I'm interested in that, in a sense, mathematically, or I'm interested in that as a combination of mathematics and aesthetics. And I see that as sort of one of the major architectonic tropes, you might say, in the development of Western culture, okay? Developing a particularly, I would say, maybe a transcendental, a resonant music, tactile, sonority sense, as opposed to the visual. One might notice that most of what passes as scientific knowledge is visual and very strictly dependent, you know, like the periodic table, or God help us, the Bohr atom, or a lot of the, not all of the quantum stuff. Some of the quantum stuff is tactile, resonantial, okay? And in that sense, I think maybe a cut above the visual. Science has been enslaved by the visual for a long time, even structuralism, for instance. So there's a lot of explanation stuff that I would attach to that, to this stuff. Anyway, give you a sense, I don't know, I think what's interesting here is that possibly interest in sound, mathematical resonance, and things like this has for some reason played, maybe that's connected with sonnets too, I don't know. It's played a big role, I suppose, in my theoretical development.
What about Handel?
I love the water music, and I love the royal fireworks music more. The Messiah is, of course, brilliant and great. Handel is very often, of course, contrasted with Bach. I suppose I prefer Bach, but preference doesn't mean very much in this. It's like you have to take a choice between two very good things, and I refuse to do so. I love the B minor Mass. I love many things from Bach. I don't like Bach nearly so much as Johann Christian Bach. I really like Johann Christian Bach. And I would like to, well, actually this is quite interesting, because the revival, Christian Bach had to wait until the CD for a revival. And the revival was mostly done by English conductors. English conductors do Christian Bach superbly well. It's like that's English music. They do it far better than the Germans. The Germans cannot do Christian Bach without making it sound a little sour, like, they wish it was Wagner, but it's not, or something like that. The British stuff is, I'm trying to recall the names of these conductors, but they're tremendously good.
The early music people.
Well, some of them, who are these people now? The St. Martin's in the Field.
Yes.
Christopher
Hogwood.
Yes. And
most of them were at Cambridge.
Is that so? Okay. Yeah, it's quite possible that the Christian Bach revival was done at Cambridge, as a matter of fact. This has convinced me of a number of things. One of them is that London has played a much greater role in music, in Western music, than most people think. And it's a role that contrasts with Vienna. The successful Viennese composers came to London, like Haydn. Unfortunately, Mozart never made it. Beethoven was subsidized from London, as you may know. But Christian Bach worked here, and he was a great friend of Gainsborough. And they would do concerts by showing Gainsborough's landscapes, which was the art form that Gainsborough preferred. They would backlight Gainsborough landscapes and then play Christian Bach's music. Christian Bach's music has been called more Mozartian than Mozart, and very often it is. Sometimes it's better than Mozart. It's really very, very good music. It's only other ones, the other initiators of the new music were the Mannheim school, people like Johann and Karl Stamitz, and a guy named Cannabich, who's also very good, a German composer named Cannabich. The Germans don't even do those as well as the English either, so you have the idea that there was a kind of trope developing in music there, possibly correlative with the sensibility writers like Keats and Shelley later in England and so on.
Let's come back to Harvard again.
Yes.
There must be. Did you go on with astronomy for 3 years?
No. I quit it after 1 year and experimented with various things. I think I was an English literature major for one semester, and then I went into history, and I did my degree with honors, cum, in medieval history, which of course makes Cambridge a wonderful place to walk around in. But I did a medieval history, and then in my fourth year, in my senior year at Harvard, I met a gentleman, Eugene Anderson, later.
Can you say the name?
Eugene Anderson.
Yeah.
I met him in a poetry composition course, as a matter. He was a very good poet. And he was an anthropology major, and he more or less steered me in that direction, or at least I had some very important conversations with him, and he said basically historians and anthropologists think very differently, radically differently, almost opposite to one another. And I thought that sounded like a very good thing, because I was not much impressed with the way historians were thinking. In fact, I'd made up my mind that historians can't think. And I still think that historians can't think. I mean, there are great historians. Some of my best friends are historians, as they say. But
so, what do you mean by they can't think?
Well, they in their extreme interest in sequentiality and one thing after another. Basically, they miss the paradigmatic factors. They miss the cross-cutting factors or synchronic factors. So beautifully evidenced in music, for instance. All right? Anthropologists don't seem to have a problem like that. If anything, anthropologists are like the Mayans and the Hindus, who believe in inverse things and everything happening at once. Or at least they seem to be able to do that better, and I prefer that. I think that anthropology gives one the other reference, the other set of references that history doesn't provide. And since history is basically doctrinaire, ideological, etc., and totally identified with political currents and things like that in our civilization. I think it's time we had some relief from that. That's why I like anthropology very much and take it very seriously intellectually, even though most of us anthropologists, we're so scattered. We're so fragmented with our different areas of expertise. You know, it's like a collection of disparate objects, isn't it?
A cabinet of curiosities.
It's a cabinet, yeah. We have a graduate student in archaeology. There's a term the Dutch used to use for a cabinet of curiosities, a Kulturkammer or something like that. She sort of accused some of these Vermeer interiors, you see, of being these Kultur, sort of the intellectual equivalent of a Kulturkammer. A little niche of the world's wonders and things all put juxtaposed together like that. That's basically one thing. It's one of the virtues, I think, of our profession. But you see, what people wonder where anthropology is going, don't they?
They do.
You know.
They have forever.
Of course, and we are no help. I mean, we certainly aggravate that potential. And yet, if you look at Chinese civilization, for instance, there was this period after the unification of China when they instituted the civil service system, right? And by dint of something, possibly burning books and burying scholars alive, I don't know, they managed to set up a situation where they abolished disciplines. There were no more disciplines. There was basically Chinese literature or whatever, I don't know what the classics, the Confucian classics, right? Okay? Mm-hmm. And you had the 3 exams, right? The 3 degrees of expertise, the last one graded by the emperor. You could be a provincial governor, you could be a general, you could be a mandarin, based on your skill and cleverness at interpreting the classics. That was a unification, an abolishment of disciplinary boundaries. I like to think sometimes that we're tending towards something like that in perhaps 50 years or so, or 100 years, there won't be these differentiae between professions, that we will have some kind of generalist. Now, it occurs to me that the only kind of generalist that makes any sense in this context is an anthropologist. But how are we going to unify the discipline? With the degree of fragmentation, you can see, you can go to the largest convocation of anthropologists in the world is the American AAA conventions, okay, which are unbelievably chaotic. You go into one of these huge hotel lobbies, like in the Washington Hilton or something like that, and there are 5,000 anthropologists, and they're all having their separate, highly motivated, entranced conversations, and nobody loves to hear themselves talk more than anthropologists. Look at me. I'm worse than my father, and my father was unbelievable this way. And people listened to him because he told police stories, right? I mean, I just tell, New Guinea stories and stuff like that, and so people are disinclined, and they say, Roy, why don't you take a vacation? Right, why don't you go on a cruise ship or something like that? And so these guys love to hear themselves talk, right? And you've got this immense room full of them, and so you open the door to the Hilton lobby. How are you going to get unity out of that? You'll never get unity out of that. This is some kind of a diffractional heat death thing for the universe, and everything's going off in its own direction, right? I'd like to think I would love to think it would be really so wonderful to think that, say, so one of these brilliant young geniuses like Tony Crook, in England, Tony Crook. See, if they could discover some way of bringing order into this, bringing unity into this chaos of cultural insights, explanations, tropes, directions, and things like that, that would be great. I'm saying that because Tony did something wonderful for our work in Papua New Guinea. Unbeknownst to many people, there is a multi-ethnic religion in the center of New Guinea, or there has been, in what are called the Star Mountains, or the Mountain Oak region. There is an institutionalized religion that has persisted over about 400 years at a place called the Telefolip. It has its own buildings. They rebuild these buildings generation after generation. I had the chance to interview some of the elders a few years ago. The ideology of this religion, it's the Afek religion. It's based on the creatress Afek. And her nemesis Magalim, who is the end of the world. He's Binima, entropy. And the world is seen as more or less a contest between these two. Many say it's very interesting. They have a series of initiatory seclusions, and they use Schrodinger's cat. They use the idea that from quantum theory, this idea of whether the cat is dead or alive, the Schrodinger's cat thing.
Yes, yes.
That's one of the tropes they use in initiating these kids. I mean, they want to elicit answers like, we cannot know. We cannot know the answer to that because it depends on how you ask the question. This is this religion. It's like somewhere between Buddhism and quantum theory or something like that. It's an intellectual discipline that's indigenous to New Guinea and existed without the existence of a centralized state. It was, however, centralized as a religion. Tony Crook, in his book on the subject, calls it the graveyard of anthropological careers. I've had students who, one of them wrote, I thought, one of the best studies of Mountain Oak people. Nobody knows where she is now. She disappeared. I can't account for it. And 3, 4, 5, 6 others who just left anthropology after working there. This is a case of competition between the anthropologist and the indigenous folk. And the indigenous folk win, and the anthropologist loses. Frederick Barth, who's a very, very brave man, and a man I admire very much. Frederick Barth published the first, and for a long time the only book on the Mountain Oak. And he had the sentence in it, the amazing thing is the absence of shared assumptions between people in intimate interaction. That lost him his job. His wife divorced him. He was almost institutionalized, I was told.
When you say that lost him, you mean...
That sentence.
Really?
In Norway. People take things very seriously in Norway. These are Vikings, after all. And Frederick is my hero. He's, I think, one of the greatest men in anthropology because he had the guts. If he had the conviction, he had the guts to publish that sentence. Of course, he got another job, a very good one. Of course, he's still a leader in Norwegian anthropology. Okay? My point is that afterward, Tony Crook found a solution to the Mountain Oak thing. He said in his thesis, these people have developed an art of changing the subject in mid-sentence. They've developed a rhetoric that if they use it, they can convince you that the society is full of secrets and no one will ever find out what those secrets are. But it has nothing to do with it. The secrets don't exist. This is their way of talking. They have this finessed rhetoric that drives the anthropologist crazy. Okay, so what I'm telling you is that, well, someone from Cambridge, a student of Marilyn Strathern, solved what was the biggest problem in New Guinea studies, solved with that what was the biggest intellectual problem in anthropology. So what I'm saying is that there's hope. There's hope that maybe anthropology will someday be able to achieve some kind of unifying synthesis. Because if this culture is ever to have something like what the Chinese got, the abolition of disciplinary boundaries, one could not do it with anything less general than anthropology. It would have to be anthropology. Now, I see a lot of, say, Sir Edmund Leach's work in this direction. I see a lot of Marilyn Strathern's work is going in this direction. It would presage a great future for anthropology, and yet I don't see it as coming very soon. But I think it would be the destiny of our discipline. Something that started with Sir James Fraser, something that started with E.B. Tyler, something that started with Lewis Henry Morgan in the United States. We invented kinship. You people invented culture. With E.B. Tyler, Edward Burnett Tyler invented culture. Lewis Henry Morgan invented kinship in Rochester, New York. From then on, the British did kinship, and the Americans did culture.
Why do you think that?
I don't. Some law of inversions. Some law of inversions. I'm not quite sure why that happened, but it's terribly ironic. It's one of these big ironies. You see, everybody talks sometimes in England with tremendous irony about an American cultural anthropologist. Now, what could this be? Why is culture such a mystery to these Americans? Why are they always thinking it has patterns and things like that? And then we Americans, we look at the British and we say, well, society, yes, they have this great place value society, this social place is the only thing they ever think about. So of course they're going to do kinship and social place. That's what Americans often, this is our counter-accusation after the culture thing. They're both talking about the same thing. Each side is using up its biases against the other, so to speak. It's really quite interesting.
You mentioned a couple of people there who would be nice to, at least one of them, say a little bit more about, as we go through, and you mentioned names.
Yes.
Someone who is very close to your work in many ways is Marilyn Strathern.
Yes, indeed.
Tell me something more about your relations with Marilyn.
Well, actually, Marilyn and her former husband, Andrew, was interesting. When I first went into the field in New Guinea in 1963, it was very lonely. Not many people had worked in the New Guinea highlands, and I had bought myself a shortwave radio, and I was listening to it one evening in the village, and they had announced the arrival from Cambridge of Andrew and Marilyn at Mount Hagen to work with the Hagen people. It was very successful. One of the best research experiences. Marilyn and Andrew wrote very varied things. They wrote about body decoration, which no one had written about until that time. I mean, they would tackle really interesting and far-out topics. So I felt very good when I heard that on the radio. I thought, someone is here, someone serious is here doing studies in the highlands. Later, their statistics came out as to the temporal distribution, so to speak, of workers in the highlands, and I was able to plot a bell curve that peaked in 1972 of workers, people doing field work in New Guinea, especially the highlands. It turns out that this was the great time of Melanesian work, and the Melanesian work cast this huge spell, this kind of influence over anthropology. I think it's still going on today, although it's diminishing. To some degree, also work in Indonesia and Madagascar peaked at about that time, and that was the great fueler of concrete material, concrete data for thinking. I think that Marilyn's work took the lead partly because she was very attentive to gender issues, and that became, I'm not talking about feminism, although she does mention that, but gender, the treatment of gender in anthropology. I think that she was kind of a landmark figure in that. And I've always honored her for that. I do gender a little bit differently when I handle it, but I've always admired her. Then this thing about holography, fractal mathematics, she was also a pioneer in that. As a matter of fact, when I wrote my first thing called The Fractal Person, it was actually under the influence of Marilyn's work and in a volume edited by Godelier on Great Men. And I mentioned particularly that this study was derivative of Marilyn's work. So I think that Marilyn was, and to some degree perhaps the work of Marshall Solons too in the United States, I think that her work was, diagnostic, emblematic perhaps of the kind of theoretical insights that came out of that sort of investment of research time in aerial investment in Melanesia, Indonesia, and so on. And of course, it counterparts the much earlier one in Africa. We've had actually a lot of researchers from Virginia working in Africa, but Virginia has a very, very different tradition than, say, the Africanists themselves. Our Africanist was Victor Turner. And his work and the work of some of my other colleagues channeled these Africanists in an entirely different direction. Virginia Africanists looked nothing like traditional Africanists. The people they describe, the Africa that they describe, is different. It looks like Levi-Strauss. It looks like the Pacific. One of our most effective workers. He worked with some people in Togo called the Cabré, Charles Pio. Totally ingenious guy. Incorporated these gender insights from Marilyn Strathern and others, incorporated a number of structural insights and things into his work. And as he put it, kinship among the Cabré is based on feeding people. And if you trace this out and study out the idioms used, it looks like something that comes from Polynesia. It doesn't look like Africa. That's the generic trait or failing or what you will of Virginia Africanists. Our Africa doesn't look like other people's Africa, okay? It doesn't look like Meyer Fortis's Africa or Evans Pritchard's Africa. The newer actually look strikingly like New Guineans in retrospect. And of course, this is kind of an ironic contrast. But I think Evans Pritchard came like maybe closest to this. But basically, you've got different eras in anthropology, and you've got different problem areas and area problems. For a while there, with Sir Edmund Leach, you had the possibility of something with Burma and Southeast Asia. The political systems of Highland Burma was something I taught very much. Much later, we had a graduate student, herself Chinese, Hai Tsui Ping, who did about 10 months of field work with the Kachin or Jingpo, as they called them, that live in China that no one had researched before. This blew the whistle on the whole Gumsa Gumlao controversy, everything of that sort. Tsui Ping, she came out of the field. I debriefed her. I said, well, what do you have now to say about political systems of Highland Burma? Levi-Strauss's comments on the Gumsa Gumla. What is your opinion on this? She said, it has nothing to do with it. She said, it's all the bamboo on the skirt. It's a matter of what idioms, symbolic idioms they use and how they use this tremendous symbol of the bamboo and the skirt. She said, you can do anything with that. And see, that sounds like Tony Crook once again, and this kind of very clever rhetorical art or finesse of creating the illusion of immense secrecy, where no secrecy need exist. And so you think, one thinks we ought to pay some attention to rhetorics, both the type of rhetoric we use to talk about these people and the type of rhetoric they use. You see what I mean?
Again, you mentioned several interesting people there. I mean, what is your... Evans Pritchard was my die field examiner, and I've always had a enormous respect for him.
Me too. All of the people I've known I've always had an enormous respect for him. The newer, that of course, that is despite Malinowski, despite everyone else, that is the type case monograph that has dominated anthropology. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
The things written at the end of the Newer, these things on Newer's mind is mostly on his compound. Evans Pritchard's, almost disdain for that telescoping lineage system that he talks about and the politics involved with it. There's something very beautiful in that. He's actually achieved a kind of objectivity in a highly and all too subjective discipline. And rather than try to emulate him, what people have done with his newer work, and of course with his other monographs and stuff like that, is, what religions do when they get to be a little bit too cloying and close to themselves. They literalize things. They take these beautiful metaphors through which EP has allowed us to have like a space of thinking about the newer, and then make them, they typecast them, they literalize them, they make them into formulae, which is of course one of the problems with structuralism too. It's one wants to have a bit more freedom of thought with those things, and not think they are constrained really into triangles, although my God, I'm as guilty of triangles as anyone. I just sort of like them. Three is a lucky number, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And the other person you mentioned there, who was my great hero in America, Marshall Salins.
Yeah, Marshall, yeah. Marshall, you probably know, is the brother of, his brother runs something called Second City in Chicago. This is a political cabaret. The Salins family are into comedy. Now, this is something that's extremely important and powerful. This is the power of humor in anthropology as a humanizing and liberalizing element. Marshall is a master of that. My teacher, David Schneider, was a master of that. David Schneider's best book is called Schneider on Schneider, and consists of like unbelievably droll stories. It's just all humor. David accumulated, and David taught with these humorous stories. He was my major professor. He was the supervisor of my dissertation. He always taught that way. This was David. David was humor in anthropology. Marshall is like that too. It's an American style. It's almost an American Jewish style. Marshall Salins, I think Edith Turner told me, and Marshall told her, that he is a direct descendant of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism in Eastern Europe, okay? And the founder, the Baal Shem Tov, was considered the village idiot. He was considered, he couldn't debate in the temple on law and these things that a good Ashkenazim Jew would do. So they made him escort the school children to and from school in this little village. And he made up cute little stories to entertain the kids while he was walking them. And those stories became the basis of Hasidism. And there you have David Schneider in that, you have Marshall Salins, and Marshall is, these guys use this humorous technique of storytelling. They use it almost as though they were Hasidim themselves. You see, it gives a very distinctive flavor to American anthropologists, and they have educated a lot of us. They're very important people, and that's a very different kind of tradition than you have in England. I mean, there are people. I like to think Marilyn Strathern has a particularly good sense of humor that she will sometimes exercise, but she's very shy about it. Tony Crook, actually, her student, is more forward about his sense of humor that way. And it may be something that's emerging in English anthropology now, but It's been almost a kind of secret of American anthropology. David Schneider had a lot of students. Some of them were quite successful, and so on and so forth. And they were pretty much propelled by this sort of humorous discourse thing.
You reminded me that David had such an influence on you. He was your PhD supervisor, wasn't he?
Yes. He actually, what had happened is that David had had a strange career before that. He had been, I think, at Berkeley, where he was only for a few years. Chicago had just lost Robert Redfield, who is its principal figure in the 1950s. The Primitive World and its transformations, his work in Mexico and Chiapas and things like that. Redfield was quite a fine scholar and a big figure, actually. And so the question was, what was Chicago to do after Redfield? One of my teachers, Milton Singer, who was actually, had close ties with Cambridge. He was involved, he was sort of carrying the aura of Redfield after Redfield passed away. And I had actually took a lot of coursework with Milton. Fred Egan, another one of my teachers, Fred basically raided Berkeley and brought three people, David Schneider, Clifford Geertz, pardon me, Clifford Geertz and Lloyd Fallers, a very staunch Weberian. These people were supposed to be staunch Weberians, and what was that guy now that they were always, okay. Anyway, Talcott Parsons, they were Parsonian anthropologists. Schneider described himself as a parsnip. They were supposed to come to Chicago and teach Parsonianism, okay. I was, I think, present in David Schneider's first lecture class. It was called the Systems class for incoming graduate students, you see, in Chicago. There's a lot of loose humor. There's a great deal of loose humor. We were supposed to read Parsons, and we couldn't get through it. It was this sort of horrendous, we thought, kind of eclectic anthropology that was supposed to put sort of energetics, economics, social interaction together into some kind of a big totality, and one was supposed to deduce the system from it, and they called these courses the systems courses.
So you mentioned that David Schneider and Lloyd Fallers and someone else came.
Clifford Geertz.
Clifford Geertz came and were meant to be doing Parsonian things, but instead they turned to culture.
They developed their own idiom, and it's quite remarkable that they didn't agree at all on it. It was called a cultural analysis, like Cliff wrote this thing, religion as a cultural system.
Yeah.
David wrote cultural accounts of, say, things like American kinship and things like that. It was very, very good work, but the more important thing was that it was a change of emphasis entirely. It was as though the Americans, who since Ruth Benedict had been harping on this issue of culture as a sui generis phenomenon, as a phenomenon that did not need support from studies of kinship or social relationships or social order or history, but could be treated as an independent variable, more or less. That's what these people were trying to forefront. Cliff Geertz was only at Chicago until about 1970. He left for the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, where he had a long and, I think, for him, very successful reign. He didn't produce all that much after a while, and a lot of anthropologists found his writing style problematic but intensely liberating in some ways. So we were talking about a fairly brief time at Chicago during the 1960s when the department turned itself around entirely, had a number of people I haven't mentioned here, such as, for instance, Julian Pitt Rivers. Now, he gave me what I could consider my most valuable course. I admired him. He was an upper-class Englishman who would explain to us in class the rules for upper-class Englishmen. You weren't supposed to be able to give a course in field methods, and yet he gave an astoundingly good one. He wore brilliant ties, which is one of the reasons I do this. I in emulation of him. And of course, he initiated the community studies thing with his wonderful book, People of the Sierra. I audited his course. I took it on a whim, and I didn't know at the time that I would be in Papua New Guinea. A few months later, I got my grant very suddenly and went. And I learned, I think, more that was useful from Julian Pitt Rivers in that course than the other things had to be rethought later. What kinship I learned from Fred Egan, what things I learned from David Schneider were in the end tremendously valuable. But what I learned from Julian Pitt Rivers was practical, immediate. I had otherwise no idea of what it was that anthropologists did when they got to the field. Of course, I had no idea either when I did get to the field, but pardon me, that was a valuable course. That was a fantastically good course. And I became like my colleague George Mentor. Just a total admirer of Pitt Rivers. We also loved the story that he ran off with the wife of the Spanish ambassador. This gives added zip, puts a little bit of Indiana Jones in there. This is charisma. You can really admire people with that.
When you talked about this cultural turn, as it's often called, and the way you put it, the shift from Ruth Benedict,
yes,
sort of reminded me of the title of one of your most famous books, The Invention of Culture. Was that somehow linked?
The Invention of Culture was written because I became increasingly angry and annoyed with the type of anthropology that was being done at Northwestern when I was there. And I don't mean Bohannon. Bohannon was a good guy. Bohannon was a guy on my side. The rest of it, I thought was sort of moribund, didn't come up to what they were doing in Chicago. David Schneider was a great admirer of the invention of culture. It was a thing that occurred to me at one point. It took me out of the anthropology I had studied before that. I mean it quite sincerely and seriously as against these so-called constructionists. The postmodern people who are always saying that culture is a construction, referring back to Piaget or something like this whole French thing that came up in the low period of anthropology, this period of despoliation in the 80s, when it bottomed out and the place was full of postmodernists.
So tell me the theme of The Invention of Culture, the argument.
The argument is that culture is first and foremost invented. It's invented out of whole cloth. It's invented out of nothing, if possible, when you need something like the idea of culture. That the invention of culture belongs to a really important and perhaps universal disposition of human beings to regard part of their area of activity as innate or inherent, or something that they can't change, and then part of it as that domain over which human beings are responsible or have responsibility. But the important thing is the overlap between these two, because in cultural phenomena, so-called, as we call them, human beings do, in fact, do a great many things that they're not supposed to do. They forecast the weather. They tell you what the universe is built like on uncertain evidence. They erode and counteract their own standards for these things. We have the autonomous nervous system, autonomic nervous system, we have the sympathetic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic nervous system. These systems are, they merge with one another. The area of the innate and the area of human responsibility merge with one another. But you've got to be specially qualified in order to do this. You and I have to be professionals. Who can say what this culture is about or that culture is about? You and I have a degree which gives us the authority for certain circumstances, and perhaps for general circumstances, to dictate to the public something we should not be able to say, which is how, they thought in Old England about things, how they think in New Guinea about things in specific places. What's going on here? I think the irony is that human beings really do command in certain ways everything. But they're very, very specious, invidious, strange about how they go about doing it. Human beings do all the things we are not supposed to do. And also the things we're supposed to do. And they do them in strangely contradictory, self-contradictory ways. They're very peculiar animals. So what the invention of culture means is that culture is invented in some way out of working between these two extremes. Like we, the human race, we are the parasympathetic nervous system of the universe. We work between these two. We merge them, we mediate them. I don't like the terms nature and culture, and perhaps this whole thing was invented out of some kind of need to avoid using terms nature and culture. They're a bit crude, I think. And so I prefer these things about the innate or inherent on one hand, and the realm of human responsibilities. We are not supposed to be able to augment or bring about the Eucharist, the partaking of the substance and of the Savior. This is not a thing that human beings ought to do, and indeed they can't. One has to be a priest. One has to be in a certain line of authority to be able to do this. We are also not supposed to be able to state what culture consists of, to describe culture, to describe its possible permutations or evolution or something like that. But then when someone is given a degree like yours or mine, then we are allowed, just as the priest is allowed to perform the Eucharist, we are allowed to officiate at some of these things, or at least debate what's going on. And you've got a very funny interface. You've got the invention of culture, not the construction of culture. Culture is not constructed. Reality is not constructed symbolically, as these people, these Piagetians, these people in France like to say. It's not construction, it's invention. That's the point, okay?
Just to get it absolutely clear, intrinsically, what is different between invention and construction? Construction is much more self-conscious, is it?
It's belabored. It looks like it belongs to this long period of economic domination and industrial domination that extended through the world wars and the labor movement and the whole economically determined 19th century and in post-Enlightenment European civilization, which it's the labor period. I'm not anti-labor. I'm not conservative. I don't have a position in that. I'm just being critical of it. It's like these people who argue, I think this is called ethnomethodology, that human beings are inherently scientists, we have an inherent or innate methodology that informs our doing of things, that part of our mind is making little experiments all the time, you see. Who would take the trouble for that kind of crap? We don't work that way. We don't construct a lab. It would take you more time to construct, 5 minutes tomorrow morning than to live that 5 minutes tomorrow morning. So that the people who want to interface all sorts of procedures, even if they be heuristic, even if they pretend that they're neuronic things in our constitution that are doing this construction, that is crap. We invent, we do not construct. And so by this insight, by this assertion, I'm putting aside all of this torture stuff about, human beings as scientists, human beings as empiricists. They don't work that way. They do things very quickly, sometimes very brilliantly. Sometimes I think people are creative beings. I think they have these great coups that they accomplish, but they accomplish them instantaneously. They don't work at them. If they would work at them, they would turn out to be worthless. You see what I mean? We're not that good. We can't construct culture. We can only invent it. That would be close to the rationale of that book. I'm afraid, however, that at the time I wrote the book, my prose was very turgid. And after about the second chapter of The Invention of Culture, it gets to be something of a chore to read it. And people don't. They read it by title only, which is fine with me. But when the book was taken up by the University of Chicago Press after its first edition with Prentice Hall, I begged Chicago for the right to rewrite certain of those chapters, which I thought even then had gotten to be a bit too tortuous. And they said, no, we have to make money too, and so we'll let you change only 2 pages. And so I picked the worst pages and I changed them. But yeah, this is what I mean by that. And I mean this very radically. It's the thing is also related to a thing that I call obviation, which I do with triangles. It's a procedure for studying myth. What I mean by obviation, well, the dictionary definition of obviation is to anticipate and dispose of. What I mean by that is that the career of symbols in our culture is that the symbol means, the symbol signifies, the symbol goes through its paces by, they call it deconstruction, I would just call it exhaustion or degeneration, that what you see is a series of symbols falling apart, disintegrating, that there's no such thing as a constructive assemblage of our culture by using symbols as though they were Legos, you see, and making buildings out of them and making cultural scenarios out of them. No, what happens is that something's falling apart and we just think it's coming to, it's obviating, okay? This is an almost, I suppose, Heraclitan way of looking at things. I personally, I prefer Wittgenstein. I was told that Wittgenstein used to hang out around here.
I had a room where he used to, where the famous confrontation with Karl Popper took place, Wittgenstein's poker and so on.
Yes.
And the Cambridge Philosophical Society is room H3. I'll show you it afterwards.
Yes, I'd like to see it. I teach the Tractatus in my cultural inventories course, and I teach that with Jorge Luis Borges' stories.
Okay.
I think that both Wittgenstein, with whom I have some disagreements, I think I would be mad not to disagree with him at certain points, but I really love him, and I love the spirit of things in his work. Okay, he was also a Rilken. He was also very fond of Rilke, which makes me. He said he thought Rilke was a bit conceited, but otherwise that he liked him. Pardon me. So I think of myself as a Wittgensteinian, and I do not like phenomenologists. I do not like Heidegger. I do not like Husserl. This whole slate of things that these people have tried to invoke in the desperate periods of the 1980s and 1990s and keep quoting as though they understood something, I think that's crap. I'm a Wittgensteinian. I don't think Wittgenstein would have suffered that kind of thing. Okay, he was a brilliant man. So anyway,
And you mentioned Borges.
Yes, yes.
You're a fan of Borges.
Very much. And also Ursula Le Guin, the science fiction author.
Kroger's daughter.
Kroger's daughter. I teach a course I use 2 of her books regularly in this course. The one I like best is The Left Hand of Darkness. Light is the left hand of darkness, and darkness the right hand of light. It's about a planet where people do not have permanent gender. It's a glaciated planet. And they have a religion called the Handara, which is based on ignorance rather than knowledge. And it's based on going into trance and merging with what is around you rather than thinking separate thoughts. And it's based on a thing called the foretelling, in which a group of adepts, including 2 schizophrenics, somebody going into sexual heat, and so on, they will give you the answer to any question, regardless of whether they know the specifics of that question or not, simply by knowing yes and no that well. It's sort of the ultimate dualism. So the protagonist in that novel, who is sent out to this planet, Genliai, he's sent out to this planet to bring it into the acumen of civilized worlds, of sentient worlds. They're all colonized by various types of human beings, okay? So he has this difficult and dangerous task of traveling on Gethen and bringing their very peculiar governments into line with this. And early on, he wants to know if his mission is going to succeed, because very often emissaries like him are simply killed. I mean, take me to your leader, I'm from another planet. Wham! So he goes to a foretelling. He seeks out the foretellers, and he has them answer the question, will this planet Gethen be a member of the Ecumen in 5 years? And they go into trance, and it takes them days. And there's like hysterical laughter, and these people are. And finally he sees the weaver, the leader of the thing, as a woman in light with a sword, saying, yes, 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 yes. It's a very, very beautiful novel. I think it's the best. It's an anthropological science fiction novel. I think it's the best science fiction novel ever written.
I must read it. I've read some of her children's.
Yes, she's especially effective with children things. She's worthless as a poet. But that, you must read that, please, for me.
I will.
Okay?
I will. Yep.
It's that good. It is really that good. You'll love it.
I will. One thing I wanted to... well, just leading on from there, what you said about symbols.
Yes.
You like paradoxical titles, The Invention of Culture, and you wrote one with a paradoxical title or something like Symbols That Stand for Themselves.
That's right. And then later in a book on, edited by my colleague Fred Damon and Mark Moscow, who's at ANU, a book called On the Order of Chaos. It's recent. I wrote the afterword, and it was entitled, Order is What Happens When Chaos Loses Its Temper. David Schneider liked those kinds of titles too, and I guess I learned that from him.
Tell me about, the definition of symbol is that it can't stand for itself, so how did you get around this paradox?
Well, symbols that loop back and do stand for themselves for a brief moment are the kind that obviate. In other words, yes, it's a little bit something like Kant's Ding an sich, or a thing in itself, that referentiality is ultimately necessary for meaning or signification in any case, and a self-referencing thing obviously has no meaning. Yes, that's exactly that's what happens when you complete the obviational loop, or all right, you have a thing that falls by itself, that degenerates, that goes out of being. It completes, the Hegelian triadic dialectic, whereby you have the synthesis, the thing ends in the synthesis. What I discovered was that Hegel really didn't go far enough with that. If you double the triangle back on itself and draw one inside of the other, you get a double synthesis that finishes the whole scheme. The problem with the Hegel thought he discovered the end of history. So did the Americans when the Eastern Bloc collapsed, but they actually discovered the beginning. The problem with the Hegelian dialectic, or even in a sense the Marxian dialectic, which of course Marx got by turning Hegel on his head, right? The problem with this is that Hegel said at the end of the synthesis you have an Aufhebung, what do we call that? Sublation, in which you achieve one of these Kantian enigmatic things in itself. That's the dialectic collapses into something like that. I wanted to put together something like a double dialectic, which would allow you not only to witness that type of collapse, but actually witness and experience the whole process reaching its necessary end, that nothing comes after assimilation. This is a deterioration, or like one of those birds that disappears up its own rear end kind of things that people used to talk about. And that this process of disintegration or meaning loss, or call it what you will, is the natural tendency of symbols, and that they all do that, and that they degenerate that way in time in almost a Spenglerian kind of way, where you have a culture basically disappearing. And I don't think that Spengler thought of it this way. I think Spengler thought of it as a kind of a ongoing cyclicity that after a while simply tires out, and then you have kind of a stale civilization there. I don't agree with that. I think that the symbolism of the civilization positively exhausts itself. And yes, you get things afterward, but that we have to face this not as a peculiar cyclical thing that just happens to civilizations, but as a necessary part of the symbolism in the civilization. I don't think that Spengler paid much attention to semiotics, to what happens to symbols. He was thinking in a Goethean or perhaps Nietzschean universe that has very little to do with what we do in anthropology. He might have liked this kind of stuff, like obviation, but of course he's not around to tell us about it either.
Gregory Bateson.
Yes, okay, fine.
You knew Gregory Bateson, did you?
Slightly. I engineered a meeting with him because I'd gotten very, very excited about his work when I was at Northwestern. And Bohannon was saying one day, he said, Roy, who should we give an honorary degree? And he said, that would be good because Bateson has some friends in the psychology department and we could bring him by here. And he did come, and so I had a chance to talk to him, and that was marvelous.
Mm. What sort of mind? He had a very original mind, didn't he?
Bateson had, it was a little bit like Vic Turner. He had one idea, and it was a magnificent idea. It was actually the driving idea of, as he put it once, scientific research and weaponry in World War II. It was the idea of the feedback loop. It was the idea of chiasmus, maybe kind of a chiasmatic thing like Lévi-Strauss gets into sometimes. And it was an idea of a kind of very supple oppositional scenario that he first identified among the Yatmo people on the Sepik. He called it schismogenesis, and he meant by that the generation of structure, the generation of eidos and ethos, intellectual and interactional realities, relationships, through a kind of a dialectic, a schismoid dialectic, or if you will, perhaps even a dialectic of schismus with schismus. Uh, he did articulate this beautifully in one of the appendices. I think it was the 1958 appendix, cybernetically to Novin, to his great book Novin. I never got the sense that people understood it as directly as he had put it. And I always thought it would have been worth his while or someone's while to play with that a while until they could get it to a point where that would be more easily understandable. I also thought he might have made some mistakes with it. You have, how does this go? You have a symmetrical schismogenesis, and you have one between two opposed things of the same kind, and then you have complementary one, which would be, say, a schismogenesis between mutually necessary roles, like mother and child or something like that. And symmetrical would be two clans or two nations. And Bateson used to oppose these, talking about, say, the World War or something, the various nations of Europe warring with one another vis-a-vis the social classes, all the same in the case of each nation, but warring complementarily within each nation, so that if you could motivate a world revolution or rising of the proletariat in all of these different nations, you would obviate or cancel out the national boundary differences, and then suddenly it would be a different kind of war, and it would be a rising of the proletariat. And basically what he said about the Yatmo people is that they kind of use these two principles vis-a-vis one another in they have warfare between symmetrical units, and they have these arbitrated tensions within the kinship systems between actually the mother's line and the father's line of any individual. So he saw the whole thing as being supported by the alternation of these two types of tension. Okay, now that's it's almost cybernetic. It's a lovely model. Bateson went on through his life to apply these kinds of models to many different things. To the etiology of schizophrenia, and he's written very well on that. What he called the double bind theory. You see, when you've got both of these tensions working simultaneously in someone, they have to take it another way out, and they go schizophrenic. They talk word salad. They don't communicate. They're trained that way. And he applied it to different things, the communication of dolphins, which he did so much toward the end of his life that I don't know very much about it. But when I was at Northwestern, one of our students became an absolute devotee of Bateson-Haley type psychoanalysis or psychology. This student, who was, I think, particularly gifted, he was also quite a good friend of mine. He was actually the first person who forced me to read Castaneda. I didn't want to read it at that time. He made a career for himself working for something called the Family Institute in Chicago on white mother-son middle-class incest cases, of which he said there were a whole lot in Chicago. As a matter of fact, what John revealed to me was that there is a great deal of incest within the family going on in our societies now. And this is not spoken of because people are ashamed, or they think it's not a topic to get in and discuss. He said that the cases that he was working with and treating had to do with mothers who wanted to protect their sons from all those dirty girls out there on the street.
And this is quite a widespread feature in Japan too.
Is that so?
Same sort of syndrome.
Yeah.
In fact, Japanese mothers feel it's part of their obligation as mothers to provide sexual services for their sons and to protect them.
They would. They would.
But I'm going to draw you now back to your fieldwork, if I may.
Yes.
Because we've moved on from Bateson a bit. So I noticed the pattern. I mean, the 7 books that are cited in one of the lists of your publications, I think 4 are fieldwork and 3 are theoretical.
Yes, that
And
would be about right.
You talked a little bit about your first arrival in the field, but it would be very nice to take you back to that.
Yes.
And why you chose that area.
It was chosen for me.
And what was important about the fieldwork? Okay.
It's a huge topic. It's hard to think about right now. Basically, the University of Washington, which at that time in Seattle, the University of Washington had sort of an open competition among graduate students in the United States. They had something called the New Guinea Native Religions Project. They were the only university with a viable, together New Guinea Studies program. And of course, work in the highlands in New Guinea, or I was not really in the highlands, was quite new, and it was a frontier. It was judged to be a frontier area. They had already sent several people out. I think Lou Langness was one of them, and had good results with this. I simply wrote them a letter. You had to write a letter, like a contest, saying what you would do, and I don't remember what I wrote, what you would do. What you would do if, vis-a-vis, collecting, doing something about religion, trying to understand the religion. And after a number of months, they had selected somebody else first, but he was not suitable for some reason. And so they opened the contest again. This is like name our soap or one of these American things. And I was sleeping late. It was May 7th. I was sleeping late in my room in International House, and I was having a dream. I had planned to work with Australian Aborigines if I did not win this contest and get to go to New Guinea. Sleeping in my room, it was sort of, the sun was up already, and I was sleeping. I had a dream that I was getting into an airliner, and it was understood this was going to Australia for my field work in Australia. The airliner took off, and in mid-flight, it turned into a single-engine Cessna, and I was sitting next to the pilot, and the pilot was making a landing approach at a grass airstrip with banana trees along the sides and blue mountains in the distance. And I got a shock, and I said, this is not Australia, this is New Guinea. At that, I woke up because my room was being buzzed. That was the telegram announcing my grant to go to New Guinea. About 4 or 5 months later, I was in that Cessna, landing at the strip with the banana. I saw the whole thing entire in advance. The interesting thing about that was that the people who sent me there didn't know they were going to send me there at that point. So it's very dramatic. Mm-hmm. I was very confused. I was totally bewildered. I'd never been to another country before in my life. I had sort of a bad start. I got sick, trying to live on a native diet. I just ate too many sweet potatoes. I got sort of a terrible thing in my stomach, and a Czech researcher who was passing through sent me some medicine from Portland. It was very, very complicated. Eventually I got set in. And I would say that in my life in the village, that about a year and a few months that I lived there that first time, that was the nicest time of my life. It was extraordinary. I had no conveniences. Wonderful rapport with these folks in Darabee are known as extremely friendly people. They'd only been contacted or pacified for between 2 and 3 years at that point. You couldn't get anything out of them. They wouldn't tell you anything. But, it was kind of nice living with them and getting to know them and stuff like that. It was a totally remarkable experience. I never guessed that you could have an experience like that. And it was like rebirth, because you see, my mother died. She passed away just before I left. And so I needed to get away. It was, I don't know, totally amazing work. And it's really hard to.
I know the feeling. How many times have you been?
Well, not too many times. After my initial field work, and after I wrote my dissertation at Chicago, I got a job at Southern Illinois for only a few years, and I met a woman there who I married, and then she came with me back for another, I suppose, 10 or 11 months at Karamui. That was a much better time because I knew what to ask then. The Darby had this ritual that I just missed attending the first time, the habu, which turned out to be extremely important, and I was able to not only attend it, photograph it, but participated in it the second time, and that actually was the experience that set up my second book, Habu, so much better than my dissertation. That was a good book. One of the few anthropological monographs that has been used as a basis for a science fiction story by Larry Niven and James Barnes. The book is called Dream Park. It's about the Darby. It's acknowledging about my monograph. Not a terribly good science fiction story, but Larry Niven is one of my favorite authors, so it made me happy.
And then you went, subsequently have you been, or?
Yes, I returned in the year 2000 to Karamui. A lot of things happened, Ellen. While I was there the second time, I got word that the colonial government, which was about to leave New Guinea, had secretly been buying up a lot of land. To resettle 5,000 Chimbus at Karamui. Chimbus are very aggressive people, and they had, really sort of manipulated the Darby in the past. And so I took political action. I wrote kind of an expose about ethnocide in an Australian political journal. That amounted to very little other than the Governor General or whoever it was having press conferences against me in Port Moresby. It was not to my. It was not advisable to go back at that point. They probably would have shot me, actually. But a correspondent named Ian Hicks from the Sydney Morning Herald picked it up. And this was at a time when Australia had a Labour government. And Hicks wrote an expose on the government's attempt. The Australian Parliament or government informed the colonial government that there would be no resettlement at Karamui. So, we won. We won. For once, we won. And since then, the independent government has been very resistant to the idea. A Darby politician picked this up and kind of campaigned in their parliament for it after this. So and after that, between that early time and the year 2000, the Darby increased in population fourfold. So there are now 20,000 of them. So it's very, proof against this kind of incursion, I think. I feel very proud of that. That's the reason why I did not go back to Karamui for a long time. But when I did go back, it was very wonderful. I also discovered things that I would never have guessed existed there when I went back. It was a totally successful operation.
The other thing that, one of the other things I wanted to ask you about was you went there to study religion, as you said, and
yes.
We were discussing heaven and God earlier.
Yes.
Where to start on God, but anything you'd like to say about God and
Sure. I was
have
brought
a
up
cup
as
of tea
an
if you
atheist.
like.
My father was sort of a second generation American. His parents had come from the old country. They were Marxists. They were vindictive Marxists, like a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe. They look at America, they see it as a shallow place, they see it as, a place where people are cheated out of things a great deal. And So their Marxism comes to the fore. So my father was a very hardworking, very Americanist. He was reacting against his parents as well. He's a person and very atheistic, very rationalist, extremely rationalist guy, okay? And that would have been enough to trigger some sort of religion, I suppose, off in me, but it didn't. I identified with this. So I didn't even begin to think about serious things in religion until much later in my life. And the work of Carlos Castaneda, which, say what you will about it, has some...
So it wasn't, I mean, it's been highly criticized.
Oh, yes. And rightly so. Castaneda was a wretched human being. He was not a very nice person at all. I've gotten some, I think, good evidence recently that he really did do field work with the Mexican people, and it was significant. But they were not the Yaqui, they were the Huichol. And that the Huichol even named Castaneda's informant was a man named Juan Matsewa. And the Huichol are probably capable of a whole lot more epistemological and spiritual profundity than the Yaqui anyway. The Yaqui aren't great that way. But no, the core, some of Castaneda's books, like his third and fourth book, are incredible. They are probably linked to things that were going on in the Mesoamerican civilizations. And in some ways they beggar Western philosophical thinking. I say that advisedly. Okay? It's really cool stuff. I've just been working for years trying to explain that, to bring that out. Clearly, it's my most successful course. There are now thousands of people who have gone through my Castaneda course. Okay. Many of them better than I am. Okay? So it's a big thing with me. God, all right, I came into this thing when I was writing this book called An Anthropology of the Subject, with the notion of bats. In many ways, there's a lot of stuff to be said about bats, and in some way I got some very good insights by a Scottish anthropologist named McKnight.
David.
Yes. That stuff was superb. He worked with the Wicmuncan on bats. Well, the Darabi are on the other side of those bats' migration routes. So they fly over the Arafura Sea and they come up the main rivers of New Guinea, like the Purari. And they're all pregnant females when they come up. The males have scattered, and all you see are these immense flocks of pregnant females at Karamui. And the Darabi have no end of anthropomorphism that they visit on these bats. They say they build dwellings for themselves, and that may possibly be true, but I've never seen one. The original students of these fruit bats, some biologists from Harvard, found only sort of parturient females in flocks and concluded that these were creatures that did not have males. They were originating creatures. Someone then added that Carl Linnaeus had classified bats as primates. I'm told that this is almost certainly true by the DNA, that they are primates, not insectivores, whatever that means. Yeah. Well, the Darabi say that fruit bats are exactly what human beings would be if they did not have gender. The Darabi story about them is about some woman who created male genitalia for her husband, and she came from the place where these bats originate. I mean, where they stop their migration flight and give birth. And so that, from the Darabi standpoint, human beings are fruit bats that are gendered. All right. The Wicmuncan on the other side of the spectrum, they see the male part of it. And they see the bats as basic to their initiation of their youth in making them male, like the decisive male element. So the original article I wrote on this is called What is Male in Australia, Female in New Guinea, and Frequently Hangs by Its Toes. Anyway, this led to a whole lot of interesting conclusions about bats and human beings being inside-out versions of one another. Bats bounce their voices off of things to navigate, and we do the inverse. We bounce our voices off of our innards to create words. Okay. So you've got like two opposite types of being, both primates, kind of a dialectic that way. God comes into the picture because God is actually like a bat at a cocktail party. You have to imagine them, it says in the book, I guess it's him, you have to imagine this bat god that's holding a martini and standing there listening. And there's this conversation going on, and people are talking about things. And the bat will come and acutely listen. In fact, listen even better than Jack Goody. Like really listen. The bat is there with this martini listening, right? You have to imagine him human size. Now he's not listening to the drift of what you're saying. He doesn't give a damn about that. He's listening for himself, which is all that the bats ever do. They listen for themselves when they're bouncing their voice off of rocks and trees and things like that. So the bat, and what this God bat is listening for is it's trying to, by echolocation, gauge what it is. Because God, having created the universe and being more or less one with its creation, its problem is it cannot separate itself from the universe. Yes, it is all the things we've said. It is omnipotent, it is omniscient, perhaps omniscient in everything but one thing, that it cannot know itself from other things. So it's listening to what we say about it or about everything else for itself, to somehow demarcate itself against all the information that's out there, okay? It wants to be a God. It's not yet a God. God can only be a God when God is distinct enough from other things that it's not just another pantheistic invention. You see? I mean, this is almost a Heraclitan idea. It's this Heraclitan thing, we live the gods' deaths and they live ours. It's sort of like that. So that's the kind of God I believe in. I mean, and I really do believe in it. It's like this character Q in Star Trek The Next Generation. Q comes from the Q continuum. He is, to all intents and purposes, omniscient and omnipotent and likes to play silly games with the Enterprise crew, right? Played by an extraordinarily good actor named John Delancey. The question arises of why Q should want to be a member of the Enterprise crew or bother these people or do anything like that. And the answer is that he has these incredible powers. He can literally do anything he wants, but he can't appreciate his powers. And if you have those powers and can't appreciate them, you might just as well not have them. So he likes to dazzle the Enterprise crew and do crazy things to them, just to get oohs and ahs so he can feel better about himself. And he was sort of the origin of my bat God hypothesis about the universe. It's probably different than this, Alan, you see. It's probably, this is just another one of my ethnographically inspired ideas, theologies and things like that. It's probably more Borgesian, and it's probably that, yes, you will die someday. We will all die someday, of course. We will meet God. Various peculiar things will take place that we don't understand at all, and we'll be left there. We will not be dead. We will not be alive. We'll just be left there somewhat bored, wondering what the hell just happened to us. I once wrote a sonnet about the dead, and the sonnet said in the end, they never wonder where the living go. Okay.
That's nice. Several things you said, like the Castaneda and also the dream you had about landing in New Guinea.
Yes.
And something you were talking about, the kind gift you gave me, which led to a spell of strange luck.
Yes, that was odd.
Do you, if you connect all these things on a thread, I've been interviewing a lot of astronomers and cosmologists about parallel worlds and parallel dimensions. And it's quite clear that the kind of simple beliefs that many people have in religion are much less far-fetched than the ideas in the 11th dimension or parallel universes. Does it seem to you that in fact what you've experienced both as an anthropologist and in other ways suggests that that there are, as they say famously in the cliche from Shakespeare, there are many more things than in our philosophy?
Well, I can reply to you very simply, and this is based on one of the lectures, one of the approaches in the Castaneda course. I could also give that lecture to you though, if you like. At the basis of our duality, there are two selves. There are two parts of ourself. There is the anticipatory self and the recollective self. The recollective self is all you call a mind or a memory. It is entirely recollective. It's incapable of acting. It only thinks it's acting. It doesn't act. It goes backwards in time. It recollects, as Don Juan says. That's the part that we think with and remember with. The anticipatory self is always gone by the time you think of it. It's there and gone. It throws itself blindly into a space it never sees. That part of us has been with us since we were born, both parts. They just develop, the recollective part develops since birth because it gets more to recollect. The other part is the part of you that was never born and will never die. It's impervious to any of the orders that the recollective self can think up. It just doesn't belong to them. It's not in the same ballpark. One of these parts of the self claims the whole of us for itself. So that the recollective part, by thinking and thinking about itself thinking, and thinking that it's acting without even acting at all. The other part by acting as though it were thinking, but only acting, but being perfectly accurate like a ballet dancer, and always coming down where it needs to come down, even though there's no earthly reason for it to do so. But then reasons don't belong in its domain, so it just keeps, each one of them thinks it is you, and the anticipatory self is the one that dreams. It walks in your dreams at night. And the recollective one is the one that, mine is talking to yours right now, okay? It likes to boast about things, it likes to plan nice things like walks and whatever, but it never does them, it just talks about them and thinks about them. Now, the totality of these things is called the totality of the self. If you can engineer it in such a way, sometime in your life, perhaps later in your life, perhaps by the end of your life, that you can claim the totality of the self, these two parts of you will be so much a part of each other that they will be indistinguishable from one another. And when that happens, if death does happen to you, you won't notice it. You'll still be alive. In fact, death makes no difference in that case. Now, I have no certainty that that kind of state can be achieved. I'm rather certain that Carlos Castaneda never achieved it. But that's what these people are dealing with. That's what they're talking about. Don Juan would guarantee that when we die, there's a part of us that will live on, and was always here, and was here before we were born. You don't remember it because the memory is part of the recollective self, which has to do with our incarnation at this particular point. That's how the Castanedas would look at that particular detail. Okay? It doesn't at that point matter whether this stuff was made up by Carlos Castaneda or was made up by some Huichol named Matsewa or some Yaqui named Don Juan or by Heraclitus. It's an interesting way of thinking about things, okay? That's all, see?
I think at that point, shall we end there?
Yes, let's do that.
And thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure.